quite settled today. If we could put away the computers and the phones, that'd be really great. All right, super excited for today's talk. Eli Altman, he's the creative director of 100 Monkeys, which is a company here based in Berkeley, and it's a naming and branding company. He's also the author of Don't Call It That, workbook for naming a company or product, and he has experience as a mentor at 500 startups in the Bay Area, a global venture capital seed fund. So if we could give him a warm round of applause, and welcome to the talk.
Thank you for that intro. You had all that in text message format?
I sent it to myself, yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool. Hey everybody. My name's Eli. As Augustin said, I run a company called the 100 Monkeys. We're 8 people in West Berkeley, and we focus on naming stuff. By stuff, I mean companies and products and product architectures and services and one time a medical condition, and really all sorts of things. So I know most people tend to come in here and talk about their business and how they started their business, and I could do that, but I figure it'd be more interesting to talk about a very specific aspect of starting a business that I'm probably much better suited to be speaking to than trying to talk to a bunch of people who are really interested in business about business. So yeah, let's get into it. Cool. So names are interesting because it's really the only element of your brand that can go absolutely anywhere. People think that logos go everywhere. Well, except for conversations, logos can go most places. Or experience or anything else. Really, when people talk about a company or see a company's website or engage with it anywhere, the name is always there. And so, you look at companies that have kind of changed their identity over the years to try to keep up with the times. Companies that are always trying to mean something new to new audiences. And so they update their look and their photography and their language and their communication. They generally don't update their name unless they fuck up really bad. Crash a plane, Harvey Weinstein style misconduct situation. So names tend to stay with you the entire time. And so it's interesting because you get this opportunity really early on in your business. Typically before you have any customers, anything, you're making a decision that's going to last the entirety of your business, should you not screw it up. I know people talk about failure and how awesome that is. I'm not really in that camp. But maybe if you get on your second business or something, you just get the opportunity to name something again. But so, if you do it right, you have this little short string of letters, a word, 2 words. Everybody seems to like really short names. We'll get into that later. And that's just kind of the anchor point for every experience people have with your business. Someone asks for a referral, or they show up at your site, or they get pissed off with how you handle something. All of those things are filtered through your name. That's the anchor that holds onto it for everyone. And so names, a lot of people think of them as these static things, this decision that you make early on in your business, and then you made that decision and then you move on to other decisions because you have lots of decisions to make. But in reality, it's living. Every experience you have with your customers alters how your name is perceived. So you could be a company with a great reputation, and then you get new management, you try a new pricing strategy, you do something different, and people start hating you. How that, what that name means to them changes. So, yeah, idea being that what you pick early on ends up being pretty important. So can you just call your company anything? No. So why not? there's bad names everywhere, and so we're going to talk about why bad names are bad, and then we're going to use that as a way to kind of flip it a bit and talk about, okay, well, what are good names, and how do those help us? So here's a nice list of common reasons why names are bad. There's also, this is very general, like in a given industry there's lots of specific reasons why a name could be bad. And so like we'll keep it top level for now, but I imagine if we want to talk about like startups or stuff like that, hardware businesses, anything like that, we can talk about some sort of specific issues. So let's go into them. So first issue, your name is unownable. Probably, it's an extremely common fuck up, and one that is super easy to avoid. So, you know, examples are everywhere. You know, this is one big company dealing with another big company, but, you know, Sky is kind of known as this, like, IP hawk, meaning they go after anybody in Europe who uses the word Sky for any reason at any time. Small company, big company, doesn't matter, because they really like to protect it. And so there's the legal issue at play as to whether you're legally allowed to use a name. In the US, that's broken up by trademark classes. But you know, one issue with the US legal system and other legal systems around the world is that if one party has a ton of resources, legal and financial, and the other doesn't, it's not worth your time to deal with what they're gonna throw at you. So, you know, even if you do technically have the right to have a name, they'll just hold you up in appeals court until they bleed you dry, and that's not how you want to run your business. So, you know, the real easy thing here is to work with a trademark attorney. They're not that expensive, and they can help you register names and make sure that the names you use are registerable, so that you lower the likelihood of some big company or other company just coming after you for using a name in their area of business. Here's another example of a slightly different issue. So I just this morning Googled Ace. A bunch of stuff comes up. So Ace Hardware seems to like dominate search rank, but then we also have American cinema editors. We have whatever that is. We also have local listings. There's also Ace Hotels, a massive company that's all around the world that doesn't even show up in this frame. So not only are we talking about names that are legally ownable, we're talking about names that don't bury you in search. So, you know, you could legally be allowed, like if you opened a flower shop today, you could legally call it Nike. You could do that, but you're never gonna show up, ever. Or it's just gonna take a ton of resources for you to show up. And so why is that fight worth having when you could pick something original and not have to worry about it? Next reason, your name is predictable. I took this photo on a business trip in South Korea. Everybody uses, we call this the blank and blank formula, where people name companies by just picking a word and then putting an ampersand and then doing another word. They're everywhere. Like, you'll start to see them, if you haven't already, just everywhere. Like, walk around Berkeley, Oakland, anywhere in the world, South Korea. People do this, I think, because of, you know, dealing with sort of domain scarcity, just the ability to sort of use this kind of combiner to create an original unit. The problem with these names is they end up being cliche and dated. So, you know, a while ago people were dropping vowels from names, you know, Tumblr, like that type of thing. And so now when you see a name like that, it's like, oh, cool, you have an internet startup in 2006. You know, this is gonna be the same thing, just in a couple years from now. You're like, oh, you picked a word and then put an ampersand and you have another word. What an original way to name your business. So if the idea is for your name to last the entirety of your business, you probably wanna pick something that will last longer than a trend. Pretty simple concept. Your name is too descriptive. So this is like the sort of like equivalent of people wanting to name their kid like, you know, John, you know, or Susan, or names that at various times in history were extremely popular as an effort to like not stand out, to like, as if you get named that you like won't get beat up or something. You know, naming businesses is different than naming people and pets. And you know, this is kind of one of the main ways. Another issue is that, you know, most startups, new companies pivot, right? They have one area that they think, okay, we're gonna like, you know, be this type of business, and then something happens, they're really successful in one area, not successful in it, decide to change what they're doing a little bit. And then all of a sudden your descriptive name applies to a business that you're no longer operating in. So that's kind of dangerous. One example, this sad CompUSA building. So what are they trying to tell you with their name? That they sell computers in the USA. Like, does that help anyone? Is that something that they couldn't have figured out by stepping into your store? There's businesses like this everywhere, and I think the typical fear that most people are playing off of is this idea that if someone doesn't know what it is, they're not gonna buy something from me. That's not true. Just look at like the clothes you're wearing, or the places you go to dinner, or anything. We all interact with businesses whose names don't tell us exactly what they do all the time, and it's rare to think that a business whose name is what they do is some sort of like seal of approval. Well, it's like, oh shit, they called themselves that, so they're probably pretty good at it. So yeah, don't do that. Your name is word smash. So word smash is a term we invented for bullshit like this, where you just like take two words and put them together and then hope that your customers assume that you exist at the intersection of these two words. Verizon, Comcast, before they changed to Xfinity, another word smash. Some massive companies do this as a way to sort of establish total protectability. Essentially, if you can like invent a word by putting two words together, your ability to protect it is greater because nobody else is using it. Really though, don't do this. It just like, nobody thinks like, oh, this is an engaging agency. Or like Verizon is like a vertical horizon, or whatever they think that we're supposed to be placing them at the intersection of. People's brains don't work like that. You just invented a thing and it has no value to anyone. They don't understand what it is, and it's going to take more work to get that idea into their head. Your name is a popularity contest. A couple ways to screw this one up. Some people, like Mountain Dew, attempt to actually do contests to name things. This is what happens when you do that and 4chan gets involved. You know, another sort of counterexample to this is the airline Virgin. If you listed out like all of the airlines operating in the US and were to pick out like what one just based on their name immediately stands out, this one does. Most airlines have like stupid shit about like flight, being in the air, sky, like these types of things. Really obvious, simple stuff that buys them nothing, right? AirTran, another like that's like a double whammy of like being descriptive and word smash. So they transport people in the air. Like, terrific, thank you. You know, Virgin, you could see it as like scary for an airline almost. Like, so this idea that like, oh, okay, so like they've never done this before, like that's the quality I'm looking for in pilots. But like, there's a confidence to it. It feels different, their experience is different. They were ones who invented like, oh, okay, there's like nice lighting in this airplane. And so really they used it as a kind of lever to differentiate themselves, and that's something that carries through all aspects of their brand. And they get all sorts of stuff out of that. People want to fly their airline. Like so many other airlines are just like, okay, which one's the cheapest? Fine. But if this pops up, people are actually willing to pay a premium to fly, you know, on a nicer plane, nicer experience, even though like the hardware is exactly the same. You know, they're flying the same like A380, A330, whatever. So yeah, nice counterexample there. Your name is misspelled. We touched on this earlier. So this is my favorite misspelling example. Look how simple these companies want to be. They're so simple that they don't want to spell simple correctly and use that to convince you that they're all about simplicity. Just kind of like this logic trap that keeps crashing in on itself. So the real problem with these names and with like misspelling names in general is that your name is never your name. Your name is, you say it simpler, and then you have to spell it immediately afterwards. And that's your name. That whole phrase that you have to say every fucking business interaction you have for the rest of your life. So, you know, people say, hey, like, you want to have a sales call with Simpler, S-I-M-P-P-L-R, or Simpler with an extra P and no E? I mean, so you have to explain this every time, and it's just like a total waste of your time. Not to mention, like, you have people who are apparently in like similar spaces using like different misspellings of your name, so you're not even the only misspelled one. So don't do that. There's plenty of words in English and other languages that are perfectly available. No need to misspell stuff. Yeah. You are a name hoarder. So this is a different kind of situation. So I talked a lot about like company names, right? So I'm going to bring up one sort of more product architecture naming issue. There's lots of companies out there who have massive lists of products. Electronics companies are like typically the prime example of this, but they're all over the place. And so really what ends up happening is it turns into this sort of rubber band ball of like, they keep on creating new phones, and then they need to decide whether this is an entirely new phone or whether it's just like an update to an existing phone, or it's like an update to an existing phone, which leaves them with like a lot of different structures going on. So clearly they have names where it's like just their company name and then a modifier, numbers and letters, right? Company name, numbers, letters, words. No company name, numbers and letters. Different numbers and letters, so we got this like 5x, 6x, 7x thing going on. So now are those phones more related to each other, or are they more related to other phones that use the same number? And really, so what ends up happening here is, unless you're looking for a specific phone, somebody tells you, you really need to get the Huawei Honor 6X. One, good luck remembering that when faced with a bunch of other names that are letters and numbers, right? Losing scenario. But also, you have no way to navigate this architecture, which is the best phone. Exactly, right? So, you know, when you're introduced to a new product, a company's lineup of products, if you look at that lineup and you have no way of discerning, like, what's premium, what's not, you know, what's for my region, what's for another region, any of these other things that show up all the time, then people just look at your stuff and they're confused. And that's not helpful. So, you know, at a certain point you need to take more of an architecturally based approach where you're clearly communicating the different levels so people can understand what you're doing. This is something that like Apple used to do really well, but now they're starting to do it shitty just like everyone else. So those are the common mistakes. Again, dive into any industry and we can talk about like a lot of specific mistakes in that industry. But so let's flip that around and look at like how to do a good job. So the first thing is that your name should be ownable. You know, in the end it'll cost less than $1,000 to have an ownable name in the United States. That's money pretty well spent if you're planning on operating a business. Otherwise, what happens is you try to use a name, or you're like, oh, we're just gonna like put it out there and see what happens. And then you get a letter in the mail, and then you need to rebrand your whole business when you're probably like should be spending that time doing something else. You know, or you start a like trademark fight with AT&T that you're gonna lose. So use a trademark attorney. They're affordable. They're mostly nice people. So, okay, example of a protectable name. I love this name. It's interesting and it's long and it combines like two things that most people normally don't think of together. it creates this idea in your head that it's sort of like playful and fun, but serious and technical. And sort of that balance makes it exist at an interesting place in your brain where you'll remember it, where you might not otherwise. So your name should be a point of differentiation. So that's to say, if you're operating in a competitive space, you should be able to write down just in like a Word document in Helvetica, like these are all of the companies that are operating in this space. And when you put your name in there, it should easily stand out. This is the best marketing you could ever do. Most people pick a name that makes them sound like everyone else and then spends a ton of money on marketing trying to convince them that they're different. Why not just pick a name that makes it obvious that you're different, and then you don't have to spend any money doing that? That's an easier way to spend money on marketing. So, in some industries it's really easy to stand out because there are these like existing ways that people feel comfortable going about naming. Law firms are all last names. Or a few of them like really stand out and do something like strong and Greek or Roman sounding. Real estate, mostly last names and, like greener grass and like better homes and stuff like that. Pretty easy to stand out. Aviation's like all about birds and alphanumeric stuff. And then, so there's other industries, and so in those cases, it's really easy to stand out. They just sort of clearly state, okay, everyone seems to be playing in this circle, so go anywhere else. You don't even have to go that far away. But then there's other industries where it's tough, like beer, wine, music. People are open to doing creative shit in these industries, and so it becomes a lot harder to stand out. Like you go into like Mikkeller or any like craft beer shop, there's like cool stuff everywhere. There's like good design, there's cool names, weird, interesting names, stuff that doesn't make sense. It's like a fun area to play around in. And so to stand out in that area is difficult. It requires more work and research. So these are, as of this morning, the top routers on Amazon. We named one of these routers. And can anyone guess which one it is? Yeah, exactly. It's the only one that's 4 letters and doesn't have some like ridiculous alphanumeric thing going on. Although I am a fan of the Netgear Nighthawk A1600. That is an aggressive router name. So yeah, I mean, we related it to something that's just like completely outside the space, right? It's based off of this architect, Eero Saarinen, St. Louis Arch, TWA terminal in New York City. Was really just kind of interested in doing something that felt nice in a home, that felt more architectural. I mean, that's the weird thing about routers, right? Is that like, this thing is like you're supposed to place prominently in your house. For good signal, obviously, but then why do they make it look so fucking ridiculous? And then, this is an Eero on a nice slice of wood that someone decided to put on a shelf. So it's just kind of a smaller, nicer object, and we wanted something that felt natural in a home. Whereas all of those other words, like, you don't want anything like that in your house. Why would you? So that was kind of how we stood out a little bit there. So your name should get a response. The number one mistake I think people make, like not only in naming but just in branding generally, is like vastly overestimating the amount that random people like care about what you're doing. Most people don't give a shit about what you're doing, and they run into like 1,000 companies every single day, and so why should they care about yours? You care about yours, obviously, because you spend all your time on it. So of course you care, and your mom cares, and whoever. But like, if you're talking about trying to get customers, to get their attention, get them to come back, engage with you, you need a name and a brand that really merits that attention. So, the easiest way is like, it's not that they will say something, but like, just read people's facial expressions when you tell them where you work or what you're working on. Those won't lie. They will lie to you directly after that. Be like, oh yeah, that's cool. So don't pay attention to that. But like, so my company, right? I work at a place called 100 Monkeys. There's a door in West Berkeley on 9th Street that says 100 Monkeys in big yellow letters. People knock on our door all the time. Just like, oh, I wanted to see what happened behind a door that said 100 Monkeys. And then my dog barks at them. But, it's like, people sort of think that you need to like go past all this basic shit about like getting someone's attention or standing out in order to communicate something like grand about who you are and what you're doing. When in fact, like because of all of the brands that people run into every day, just grabbing their attention is like an extremely valid and important thing for a name to be doing. See that thing at the top there? I'm wondering if this next slide will work. It wasn't in the PDF before. Yeah, it works. It's a big ass fan. That's literally what this company is called, and that's what they make. They make gigantic fans. And you're never gonna forget that name ever. And it's fun to say, and people like working with them. And their logo's a donkey. And so they had fun with it. They're not taking themselves too seriously. And so then, again, do this test, right? You put down a Word document, write down all of the people who make fans. Like, is Big Ass Fans gonna stand out? Yes it is. So your name should relate to the big picture. This is kind of the opposite of being descriptive, right? Descriptive names hem you in because they talk about exactly what you're doing right now. So should that change at any point, you end up in these situations. Like I was driving behind a truck for like a water store. Why those exist, I have no idea. But it said the water store, and then in big letters underneath it that they clearly applied after, soda, coffee, and tea too, right? So, they have a business and it's called the water store, and they're like, shit, we're not making enough money selling just water. People must be getting their water somewhere else, like out of the sink or something. And so what else do we do? Well, we should sell other stuff. And then, oh no, our name is the water store, so anything else we sell won't make sense. Just like an obvious little trap. Don't set those traps for yourself. Instead, focus on things like about your personality, your ideals, your attitude, your sort of opinion on the world that you're operating in. Those things likely won't change, and even if they do, your ability to kind of pivot or relate it to something at that level is a lot better. This is a name we did for a cool company in San Francisco. It's actually associated with a computer science professor here at Berkeley named Steve McCann. And it's a program that does basically like open technology for diabetes research. And there's this problem where if you have one glucose pump or monitor, that technology is siloed because they want you to continue to use that company's products. But people switch all the time, and then you end up having to split out your data based on every different pump or glucose monitor you're using, which can be annoying and kind of not great for your health if you're really just looking to sort of understand your blood glucose. And so, we could have named them something directly about diabetes. But the problem is they're in the data business. They're about taking all of this data and making it accessible to, to customers. And so people with other diseases using other devices have these issues. So if we name them something that was just based on diabetes, the likelihood that they would have outgrown it or pivoted away from it was significant. So we named it Tide Pool, which is just all about the environment, right? A tide pool is like a really diverse little ecosystem with a lot going on. That's the idea we wanted to get across. So your name should be chosen by a very small group of people. If you can name your company by yourself, awesome. That's the smallest group of people. But otherwise, one or two people, that's great. Don't do focus groups. Don't ask everyone you know. People will just give you opinions on stuff. They love to do that, and they love. With naming, it's the type of thing where since we all name our pets, and if you have kids, you name your kids. Everybody kind of feels like they're an expert on it, and you just end up in this opinion trap. We call it the ice cream principle, which is if you pick 10 people and tell them, you guys are gonna go get ice cream, but you have to agree on a flavor. the flavor is going to be chocolate or vanilla every single time. Is that the best ice cream flavor? No, it's the easiest ice cream flavor to agree on. And that's how those decisions get made. When you're operating in a creative space, don't do that, because it just leads you towards obvious decisions, and so you won't stand out. Look at any great name. It's the type of thing that would never come out of a focus group, because it takes someone who's like confident enough to believe in something and do something different, and getting groups of people to agree on that type of shit ends up being pretty difficult. This is a brewery we named in San Francisco on 14th Street. Yeah, it's a weird name. Lots of people would be thrown off by that. But, you know, Paul liked it, so now it's the name of a brewery. Okay, so then this is my little like subcategory of things to stop worrying about. People always come to us with like issues like, oh, I've had a great name, but I can't get the URL, or I can't get the social media handles, or I'm looking for something that's like really short or pronounceable. All of that is garbage, and here's why. Tesla, right? Tesla was at teslamotors.com until like a year and a half ago. Did that stop them from developing 3 models of cars and sending one into space for some reason? No, they did fine. They switched over to tesla.com when they got the URL and had a ton of money to be able to spend a little bit of it on something like that. Saying you can't use a name because you can't get the URL is an excuse. Don't make that excuse. Nobody directly enters URLs into the URL bar anymore. They just search and then they click on something, and that doesn't make it a problem. Social media handles. Here's 2 very popular social media people and companies who don't use their names at all. So either they play off of it. Slack uses Slack HQ, probably because like some kid registered Slack on Twitter 10 years ago and didn't want to give it up for less than $10 million. And Roy Choi uses Riding Shotgun LA. I don't know what that means, but it's fine. It didn't stop him from getting like 43,000 followers. So saying you can't use a name because you don't get the social media handles is garbage. Just names that kind of stand out in a different way. I'm trying to figure out what point I was trying to make with this one. Oh yeah, short names, right. Everybody wants short names for some reason. I don't know why. I think longer names or names that are multiple words are more interesting. You can get a lot more going on by like playing 2 words off of each other. Africa Twins, this name, old bike that Honda just resurrected. Cool name. Just like those words playing off each other is interesting and something you're not used to seeing. And so it just kind of creates interesting imagery. You know, I think they really just created it for the Dakar Rally back when that was actually in Africa. But just kind of like an interesting combination of words that strikes you. Another super long name of a very successful company, Schoolhouse Electric and Supply Company. That's long. I mean, most people talk about like wanting a word that's like under 6 characters. You know, this game names like almost 6 words. Did it stop them from being successful? No. And also, like, bonus, longer names are easier to trademark, easier to register, easier to find URLs for, like all this stuff. So that part's nice too. Pronounceable. People saying they want pronounceable names is like, they're just discrediting their audience, making their audience feel stupid. Like, well, if my customers can't say this word, they're gonna be insulted. And then because they're insulted, they're not gonna get a sourdough bread bowl. So, you know, I mean, this is an odd example where they're like actually telling you how to pronounce it. Faye yogurt's another example of that, where it like says a little thing in the corner, like it's pronounced Faye, not phage. Yeah, so some resources for you guys if you need. I wrote this book. It's called Don't Call It That. This is the 2nd edition of it. It's a step-by-step workbook that helps you name things. It's not a book about naming. It's literally like start to finish, when you're done, you should have a name for what you're working on. It only works for small groups. I didn't include anything about how to deal with corporate bureaucracy. I'll save that book for when I retire. And yeah, I also do this thing on Twitter and Instagram with the hashtag for it. Don't call it that, right there. All sorts of ridiculous names that I see everywhere. So if you guys see ridiculous names for stuff, you can do it. And yeah, I guess also I did another book recently, which is maybe more in line with like what you guys talk about in here. It's a book about how to run a small creative studio. Lots of people wrote books about like how to run small businesses, but nobody seemed to write one about like how to run a creative business. So I wrote a book about it and did it on Kickstarter, and people actually wanted it, which was surprising. So yeah, that should be out like digital edition next month, real deal in May. Thanks. So you guys have questions? So
I feel like with your like specific companies, like naming things, it's like you can do all the research you want to do and like all this work, but at the end of the day, I feel like it seems to me, I feel like you suddenly just have this like, oh, that's the name, or like that's the one, you know. So how do you like navigate that? Where sometimes like how do you come up, like what's your process, I guess, for coming up with the names, and like how do you navigate sometimes where you just can't think of like the right one, or just whatever you come up with doesn't feel like it, you know? And what's the origin of your company's name?
okay, so in reverse order, 100 monkeys. If you put 100 monkeys at 100 typewriters, eventually you get a sonnet of Shakespearean quality. Speaking to the idea that we need to come up with a lot of names to end up with one that like actually ends up working. Sort of relates to your first question.
Yeah, I was going to guess.
I mean, okay, so there's no epiphany eureka moment. Doesn't exist. If it does, the likelihood you'll be able to get that name is probably pretty low too. So don't think about it that way. It's not helpful. Think about like the relationship that you want to have with your audience, the feeling you're trying to create for people, stuff like that. You know, if you're sort of waiting for lightning to strike, it won't happen. And just having done this like several hundred times, it's not it. It's like the best analogy I can come up with is kind of like the beginning of a relationship. It's like, is there the potential for it to become something great? Like, yeah, sure. But you have to like make that happen and like put all that work into it. You know, it's like kind of like believing in love at first sight, which I don't. So maybe if you do, you believe that name will just like strike you somewhere. But otherwise, yeah, better to just pick something that works and like build all that meaning into it.
Two names that I'm curious about. One, Big Ass Fans.
Yeah.
Don't they violate literally everything you said in the don't do? Like they talk about fans, right? Like they're literally, if they pivot from fans to like anything else, they're just screwed, right? 'Cause they don't sell Big Ass Fans.
Yeah.
The second thing is Apple. It's literally like a computer company, but then the name of a fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's like, it doesn't seem ridiculous to us now, but what if I started a company that was about big data and I called it kale? Like that makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah, good questions. So, I mean, the Big Ass Fans thing is really sort of like kind of you have to know the rules to break them type of situation. That they're talking about what they're doing, but they're doing it in a way that nobody else is willing to do. They also just created other business units for selling other things. So that's like another way to, you know, solve that problem should you run into it. Apple's an interesting example. I know a lot of people kind of point to them for like branding, naming, stuff like that because they think that their name is so great, but I think really what they're doing is sort of conflating their success with their branding. Like I don't think their branding is that great, especially recently. It has been in the past when Steve Jobs was alive. But, you know, so really it's like this idea of, you know, they wanted to be the top of a list at a trade show a long time ago, so they picked a name that started with an A. I mean, so, you know, do I think Apple is a great name? No. I think it's different in their space. So, you know, going back to that point, that like, that's not something people call computer things. So it feels like original and different in that way. But, you know, is it a great name? Does it stick or make me think of kind of interesting things related to what they're doing? Not really. So,
what made you an expert in this field of branding and naming? What of your experience made you really good at this?
I grew up doing this, which is weird. My dad started the company that I run now, I thought I wanted to be a graphic designer and went to design school and then worked as a designer in San Francisco for a couple years. And then I was just like, wow, there's so many designers here who are so much better than me. How can I add value to these companies? And you know, they were branding agencies, so they needed naming, and so we got naming projects and they handled them in a way that people who don't do naming projects on a normal basis would handle them. And so I just said like, hey, can I take over this part of your business and show you how to like, you know, make it work well and feed into better design projects? Like, yeah. And then I did that for a bit and then realized, well, if I'm just doing this full time, like why would I not run my own business? So.
What's your favorite / like most successful company you've named?
Well, two completely different things, because generally, like, my favorite ones are things that, you know, don't make big waves. I think really that brewery that we did, Standard Deviant, was like one of the most fun projects we've worked on. I really like that name and like that we got someone to pick something that most people would be afraid to pick. Biggest thing, I mean, we named a lot of startups that have, you know, turned into really big companies. Hero, Inkling, Okta. We do products for Google, Microsoft, Samsung, a lot of stuff like that. So like Dolby Atmos, we named their theater system that they're putting into big theaters now. I don't know, a bunch of stuff like that. The Jamba Juice breakfast menu. I don't know.
So how did you guys get your like name out there and get other people to know about 100 Monkeys?
I mean, the name did a good job of it. It's weird because like, so on our website we list all of our competitors, just all of them. People email us and say like, hey, can you add us to your list? Sure. And we do that because like most naming companies have dumb names. And so like, if you're looking to start a naming company and you call yourself the naming company, actual naming company that exists, you know, like why would you hire them? So, I mean, in terms of growing the business, it has just a lot more to do with normal business stuff, like, you know, over-delivering and being really good to our clients, showing up, keeping track of them, knowing, you know, when big events happen for them, when they're launching new products, like all that kind of stuff. There's really like no magic to that side of the game. It's just about understanding the cycle and like the types of clients that we have. We have, you know, we work with massive organizations that name stuff all the time. And then we work with people who are probably naming the only thing they're ever gonna name. Maybe they're like a serial entrepreneur and we'll, you know, we'll name like 3 or 4 of their companies in their lifetime. You know, so like those are the types. It's just kind of about managing those types, you know, in ways that make sense for those type of people.
This is sort of more to do with the business itself, but how many of your, like of all your clients, are the majority of them clients that you've worked with before and you're just naming more products, or is the majority like companies that you haven't worked with before that you're trying to name?
By money or quantity of projects?
Oh.
Well, that's kind of the split, right? I mean, you know, the bigger companies pay more money, and so by virtue of, you know, doing more projects with them,
Yeah.
like that ends up being a more substantial portion of our revenue.
Uh-huh.
In terms of like sheer number of projects, it's definitely the like, you know, single shot thing, because people are starting businesses everywhere, all over the world, all the time.
So kind of thinking about your Standard Deviant image,
Yeah.
it had like a really cool logo. Like, do you, with your background in graphic design, like do you do logo work, or do people on your team do logo work, or do you guys like collaborate with other companies that you like to do that?
Yeah, good question. We collaborate mostly. We have at various times in the past done some of that stuff in-house. It ends up being a waste of time. It's like not the thing that we're best at. And so for us to be experts on naming and then to work with a lot of design firms locally, we have really good relationships with them. We bring them work, they bring us work. And it's kind of allows it to be this non-competitive referral environment where it's just like they know we don't do design work, so we're not gonna be wanting to like take a project from them, or like they introduce us for naming and then we say actually like we could, you know, handle that design stuff. So yeah, if that part of that is like really about building relationships, and we end up getting a lot of work from our design partners, which works out well.
During like your starting the business journey, is there anything, any mistakes you made, or things that if you could go back and change that you could tell us?
Yeah, a lot. You know, I mean, the thing I just said, for one, like straying outside of our specialty usually ends up biting you in the ass. And it's like, it's not that you can't do it, you know? Like, we could design identities, like we built websites. We ran NetJet's marketing department for 4 years. This is stupid, we shouldn't have done it. We could and we did, it just took up way too much of our time. All the stuff we were doing for the first time and likely would never do again. And so we didn't get to be experts at those things. You know, if you looked at like, you know, if you talked to a web developer or you know, someone who did those aspects of the project on a regular basis, they would laugh at the way we did it. And that's for a reason. The same reason that we laugh at how like larger creative agencies do naming. Because, you know, we do it like 80 times a year. And they do it like 3 or 4 times a year. So the amount of time we've had to learn all of the little specifics, ins and outs, different ways projects can go, like we're still learning. We're still figuring that shit out all the time. You know, it's like that movie, Jiro Dreams of Sushi. You guys, any of you seen that movie? Awesome movie. It's like about this guy who's like, his whole life basically is like dedicated to making sushi, and he has like a, you know, 3-star Michelin restaurant in Tokyo Subway. It's a great place, but it's like, he's still figuring out stuff. And his area of expertise, like compared to naming even, is like, you know, potentially even smaller, but like, there's always so much to learn about any really specific thing that as long as there's a demand for it, you're better off getting better at that thing than, you know, and growing the split between you and other people who operate in that area, than attempting to kind of step into something new where you're always going to be a rookie and never know what you're doing.
There are no more questions. We can wrap it up.